Okay, many of you have just been waiting to get to Kennedy. I don't know what the excitement was, but so we have finally made it to Kennedy. And before we get on into the information about his and Jackie's life, let's sing our song again. Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Jackson, Van Buren, Harrison, Tyler, Polk and Taylor, Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, Lincoln, Johnson, Grant and Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush and Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Donald Trump. Ding! Okay. All right. So John F. Kennedy, Fitzgerald Kennedy, 1961 to 1963. So we see immediately, and most people would know anyway, but we see immediately that is a shortened term. So we know that something happened, and we know that he was assassinated, and he was a Democrat. His vice president, we should know because we know he was assassinated. So the next person was his vice president, which is Lyndon B. Johnson, and his nickname is Jack. Growing up, he was called Jack. Many people just called him Jack. So that's his nickname. This is his presidential portrait. I told you that this one is different. Everyone has noticed how different his portrait is from all of the others. The color and just his posture, almost a sense of weight or heaviness on him. And then here's a picture of him in the White House and of him with his family here. Okay, so the FLOTUS was Jacqueline or Jackie, Bouvier, Kennedy, Onassis. I went ahead and put Onassis on there because after Kennedy is assassinated, she does remarry several years later. And so that's why she has a different last name. She was born into a wealthy family in New York. Her dad was a stockbroker, so stocks and bonds and Wall Street and all of that. So he was a stockbroker. And I thought this was interesting about her mom. Her mom was a horsewoman who had won many trophies. So she was she had been in competitions and different things and won trophies for her horsemanship. When she was a child, I think it was probably around when she was 11, her parents divorced and her mother did remarry. She went to schools. She had her probably several prep schools and well-to-do schools. She did pretty well in school. She liked to write, and she won her high school's graduating award for literature. So they gave a particular award for writing, and she got it. After college, she worked for a newspaper as its inquiring camera girl to photograph and interview local citizens. So she was kind of like, she did interviews and she took pictures, and she had a column in this, in a pretty good newspaper. So she had, I think this is interesting about Jackie that I don't think a lot of people realize, that she had a career and she had some real abilities on her own. I think that everyone loves Jackie because she just had this kind of sense of style. She was this young mother. She had these two little kids. We don't see that very often in the White House. You usually have these older couples. And here she comes. I think she's 31 when they enter the White House. And she just has her second son as they come in. JFK Jr. And even during all of the campaigning, she was pregnant with him. And she's got Caroline, who's just a few years old. And so she has this very young family. So I think everyone just sees her as just stylish and a mom, but yet she had some real abilities of her own. And writing was one of those. She married JFK in 1953. She had 3 children, Caroline in 1957, JFK Jr. 1960, and then Patrick in August of 1963, and this was right before Kennedy was assassinated. She had this baby while they were at the White House, but he died just 2 days later. He didn't live very long. As First Lady, so like I said, she has interest of her own. And so the first thing she does, though, is really declare that her main goal is to raise her children and to keep their family private. She is the guardian of her family's privacy, and she did a pretty good job of that. But she also knew that her job was caring for them and raising them, and that was going to be her main focus. She wasn't going to run around and get carried away with other things and neglect that she had 2 very, very young children that she was to care for. But she did have some particular interest, and one of the main ones was the preserving of the history of the White House. So they did a lot of redecorating in the rooms, and she wanted to restore some of their historical value. She tried to get furniture that had been taken from the White House before. She asked around in the public, put kind of ads out to see, do you have furniture that you know once belonged to the White House? Return it back to us, and then it would be permanently the White House's. And then because all of this renovation and restoration needed to be done by private money, not government funds, she helped start the White House Historical Association, which I love going to their website. They still are keeping it running, and this is the one that sells the Christmas ornaments. You know how we made our Christmas ornaments? The White House Historical Association is the one that raises, that does that, and it's money for their fund. So I put this on here, not because it's Kennedy, but because this is one of the White House ornaments, and guess what? This is this year's. This is 2020. So if you are interested in having a Kennedy ornament and supporting the White House Historical Association, you can buy a Kennedy ornament for your tree this year. She pressed the idea of making a position of a White House curator. And a curator is like someone who runs a museum. And she said, look, this place is a museum. This is history. We need someone who's going to run that. So that position was added a lot because of Jackie Kennedy. Also during her time as First Lady, they were going to kind of destroy a lot of the historical significance of the park across from the street from the White House called Lafayette Square. And she helped to save the park so that it wasn't destroyed and we lose all that history. She gave a TV tour of the White House in about 52 or 53, not 50, 60. She was on TV leading a camera crew through the White House giving a public tour. Another thing that she had a big heart for is American arts. So she wanted to showcase arts of all kinds. So when I say arts, I'm talking about performing arts like singing and dancing and orchestra and bands. But I'm also talking about painted art, drawings, photography, that kind of thing. So she wanted to use the White House to showcase those arts. So she had performances of all types. She had ballet, and she had different dance, and she had popular music, and she had all kinds of people invited to the White House to perform, to showcase that. She also helped to establish a natural cultural center, which eventually became known the Kennedy Center, and it's still there. I thought this was interesting about her. I never knew this. She made several public speeches in Spanish. Didn't know. And I thought this was cool. We're going to talk more about the Cuban Missile Crisis when we get into Kennedy's events, which was probably one of the biggest things that he had to deal with in office. But she helped him so much and was such a constant presence to him and help and support to him during that crisis that he presented her with the same gift that he gave his advisors. So the people that advised him during that crisis, he presented them this like silver calendar as a recognition of the work that they did to help him. And he gave the same gift to his wife. And I thought that was really neat. I thought it was neat on both parts. I thought it was neat that she provided so much help to him, and neat that he recognized that she did and recognized that it was worthy of as much honor as his advisors got. So I thought that was pretty cool. One of the biggest things she's known as is just becoming a fashion icon. That she was just beautiful. Everyone wanted hair like Jackie. They wanted dresses like Jackie. Then she wore this little pillbox hat, which is just kind of like a circle that's raised up a little bit. Looks like the top of a pill bottle. So she wore that, and then everybody wanted to wear that type of hat. She became a fashion icon. Everyone's like, ooh, that's the look we want. And they wanted to look like Jackie. She was on the cover of many magazines. She was the first lady to have a press secretary. And I put it under this because I think it is because everyone wanted to see her and talk to her and be near her, that she needed someone to kind of organize that and organize the times where she would speak to the press or go to this organization or meet with this person. She traveled to more foreign countries than any of the previous first ladies. So that's interesting. That's interesting too. She remarried in 1968 to Aristotle Onassis, who was just a very rich businessman. And when he died, she went back to her writing career. Mostly she served as an editor. And but she wrote some introductions to books, and she did some writing, but a lot of what she did was being editor to books, which is the person who looks over the book to see, what can be changed to make it sound better, does their grammar work, that kind of thing. That's what an editor does. And then she died in 1994 in New York at 64 years old. And this is a picture of her as an older lady. Okay, John, JFK, like we call him a lot, or Jack, he was also born into a very wealthy family in Massachusetts on May 29th. Oh, we're nearing his birthday. May 29th, 1917. He was the first president born in the 1900s. And I think this is key to why so many people related to him at the time, or even relate to him now, that they thought that he was more like them. He was more their age. The working class would be, his age. And so maybe that's why he was so popular in that way. He was an active child, liked sports, he was active with his brothers, even though he was sick a lot. Even as a young baby, his mother kept meticulous records of every measles, everything that everybody got every time they went to the doctor, what their shoe size was and everything. And his list was very long. He was sick a lot. There was even several times in his life where they thought he was near the end of his life. And he came through all of them. And he had health problems his whole life. And I don't think a lot of people realize that he wasn't necessarily a very healthy person. And he struggled with back problems even in the White House. He swam every day, and a lot of it was to keep his back trouble in control and to keep to keep fit because his body wasn't particularly healthy. He went to prep schools. Prep means preparatory, like preparing you for college. But a lot of times it also means like very exclusive schools for the very rich. And so he went to these schools for high school mostly, and he was interested more in pranks than in learning anything. And even his headmasters would say of him, if he ever got more interested in school, he could really do well because he has the ability to. He's just not very interested right now. And even though that was the case, he was voted most likely to succeed. I thought that was interesting, that the students looked around, and even though he wasn't the top of the class, even though he wasn't necessarily interested in academics, they voted him like most likely to succeed. And I wonder if that's because of his family. I wonder if that's because of his looks. Maybe they thought he was most likely to succeed because he was so handsome. Or if they saw something in him, a drive, a courage. I don't know. I thought that was interesting, hearing what the professor said as compared to what the students voted him. He went on to go to Harvard, and he majored in political science. He played football. He was on the sailing crew. He was on the swimming team. He golfed. He was softball, hockey. He was involved in everything. But he also, in about his junior year, he got serious with his studies and started doing well in school also. Then after school, he went into the Navy. And he couldn't get into the Army because of his health. His health was not good enough. And his dad kind of pulled some strings and got him into the Navy. And while on it was not a very big ship, but while he was on a ship, he was the lieutenant. He was in charge of his small crew. And they were rammed by Japanese. And a couple of his crew were killed, and the rest were kind of thrown into the ocean. And he, even though this hurt him and damaged his back even further, he put one of his crewmen on a raft, put the tie to the raft in his mouth, and swam to shore, pulling the raft with his teeth to get his crewmen to the shore. And then he showed leadership with the rest of his crew that came to this little island. They sent a message to get help, and they were rescued in a few days. And when he got back, he was given the Purple Heart for his bravery during that time. After the war, he worked as a journalist for a little bit, and then he became a representative, and then eventually a senator. And then he was on break from being a senator because he had to have a big back surgery. It's called reconstructive, where they kind of put back some of your back, your vertebrae together so that it works right. And he was recovering from that. And while he was in recovery and couldn't really do very much, he wrote a book called Profiles in Courage. And it highlights, I think, 8 politicians who took a stand. And I think I don't know if all of them were representatives or they were in Congress somehow, but they were all politicians who took a stand that wasn't popular at the time. And this is a book I want to put on my reading list. I think I'd like to read this. And one of the reasons is one of his profiles is John Quincy Adams. I like that. And he was the only president to be awarded the Pulitzer Prize. A Pulitzer Prize is for writers, and he got the Pulitzer Prize for this book. I also read that Jackie helped a lot in the editing of this book, and she helped him put this together. So that was cool. Even going into the White House as president, he already had a book that he had written. At the White House, he worked long days. He read about 6 newspapers at breakfast, and he worked from early morning till late night. But during that day, he usually found time to play with his young children. Jackie even established a kindergarten at the White House in a room at the White House, she put together this little kindergarten for Caroline and had a teacher and everything. And somewhere I heard, but the pictures I saw, it didn't have very many kids. So I would have to do some more research on this, but I think that the kindergarten, that she might have even had several people in the class, and it was integrated, that there was black and white children there, and she often took pictures and put them in the newspaper so that she wasn't directly necessarily for talking out about civil rights, but she was putting that it was not a big deal for their family to be with blacks together on equal stands, and she put that in the newspaper. Caroline often rode the pony around the White House, and her pony's name was Macaroni. John F. Kennedy was the first Boy Scout to become president, so I thought that was cool about him too. He was also the first Catholic to become president, which became a big deal in the election because there was a lot of fear in those days of different things that people didn't understand. And at the time, in the 50s, everyone was just kind of normal, church-going people. And I would say Protestant. And Protestant is all of the, like, Baptist, Methodist. Those are Protestant religions. Presbyterian. And here is Catholic is not Protestant. And that's different to everybody, and they don't understand it a lot. And so there was a lot of fear when he was running for president. But he won anyway. He is one president, and he is not the only one, but he is one president to not take his presidential salary, but to give it to charity. So instead of putting the salary that he gets as president in his bank account, he gave it away to different charity organizations. And by the time he was 21, he inherited a $1 million trust fund that his father had set aside for him. So by 21, he was a millionaire. So by the time he entered the White House, I think he had way more than that to his name. So he did not need the salary. And so instead of taking it, which he could have, he gave it to charity. And so I like that about him also. Tell me some things that you thought were interesting. What maybe are some things that you like? Tell me if there's anything that you know that I don't know. In the email this morning, I sent you some links to his presidential library so that you can do some of your own research if you'd like to. There's a lot of information there that you can get on your own. So share something new with us, or tell me what you like, or give me a question.